I don't even remember my thoughts on most of these, so this is gonna be great. Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey, and we're about to get very, very nerdy. All the books that I read in November. So in November, I participated in Believathon, which is the middle grade readathon created by Gavin over at How to Train Your Gavin. I vlogged the entire month, so I will leave all 4 of those vlogs down below if you would like to see in-depth thoughts on those. Today we're going to go over all the books I read in November, because yes, I read more than the 13 that I had planned in my TBR. Maybe it was 15, I honestly don't remember. So whatever I had planned in my TBR, like the Believathon TBR alone was 13 books, and then I added more. So, it's been a month. But this is hopefully not going to be a very, very long video, but we know how my wrap-ups are getting lately, so who really knows? Snuggle in, grab yourself a nice warm drink of something, and let's talk about the books that I read in November. Also, if the light looks real weird and like goes in and out during the video, I apologize. It's been raining all day and it's been gross all day, and I finally have like a second of somewhat light happening. So let's just begin. In the month of November, I read a total of 16 books. I honestly didn't even know it was that high until I counted right before this video. Yeah, so most of these are for Believathon, like I said, but I was able to read a couple of more beyond that. But of all 16 books, I read a total of 5,339 pages, and that was over 7 audiobooks, 5 physical books, and 4 ebooks. And of those 16 books, I read 13 middle grade, and 3 adult. Total opposites. I had a pretty wide range of genres this month as well. I read 8 fantasy, 1 nonfiction, 1 historical fiction, 1 mystery, 3 contemporary, 1 classic, and 1 sci-fi. And my star ratings were pretty normal for me. I had 2 3 stars, 9 4 stars, and 6 5 stars. So quite a few 5 stars this month, but yeah, it was a good month. So let's get right into the books. The very first book that I read for the month of November, I'm also not even sure what some of these counted for Believathon. So check those vlogs, because I told you during that. But the first book was Green Glass House by Kate Milford, and I'm giving this one 4.5 stars. This book is a just glorious, fun mystery book of a middle grade. This is perfect for December. So if you're looking for a good December read, this is your book. It takes place in the winter. It takes place at this inn, as you can see on the cover. It's covered in snow. It starts on the first day of winter break for our main character Milo and ends on Christmas Day. So perfect for this time of year. And it basically follows this kid Milo, whose parents own an inn, and he thinks it's going to be a normal winter. Not many people come visit the inn or stay at the inn during the winter. He's ready for just some fun, family fun. And then all of a sudden, these, I believe they're 5 or 6 different people show up and just start staying in their inn, and they get really busy all of a sudden. So he's trying to figure out why they're all there and if they are all connected. It was just, this felt like my brain when I was a kid. So like, he is discovering this real life mystery. He's trying to investigate what's going on, but he's doing it through kind of the like imagination of playing like, it's similar to like a D&D game, but in real life. He's a character, he's going through, he's trying to figure out all of these things about all these different people, but it's all kind of like a game in his head, and like that's what I would have done. I would have taken a real life situation and I would have made a game out of it. So this just, it felt like a kid's brain. This felt like how a kid would kind of comprehend and deal with all these people randomly showing up and wanting to solve this mystery about them. And it was so good. It kept me on the edge of my seat the entire time. I wanted nothing but to read this book. I was so excited for this. And is this one that I will reread? Quite possibly. Even though it is a mystery and like I know what happens and all that stuff, it had this fabulous twist of an ending. It was great. It also has this kind of like underlying, not message, but like conversation, because Milo is adopted. He is Chinese and he doesn't know his family. So like, he was adopted by the people who owned this inn, his parents, when he was like a baby. So he's not known anybody but them. But there's always this question in the back of his mind of like where he came from, who he is. He loves his parents so much. He wouldn't trade them for anybody. But there's always this question. And so there's like this internal struggle that he's having throughout this book, because like he wants to know where he came from, but like he doesn't want to change his situation. He still loves his parents, but he's afraid that trying to figure out who he is maybe like make it seem like he doesn't actually care about them. It was just this beautiful conversation that he had throughout it. And I loved this book. So if you want a good, cozy mystery, perfect for December, please pick this up. Ooh, fabulous. The next book that I ended up reading was Peter and the Shadow Thieves by Dave Barry and Ridley Pearson. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. This is the sequel to Peter and the Starcatchers, which I believe I read at the end of last year. It's kind of like a reimagining of the story of Peter Pan, and this just continues on with it. And this was fun. There's not a whole lot I can say about this because it is a sequel, but the one thing that I do love about these books is that there's never a dull moment. There's action going all the time. This is not a thin book. Like, it's heavy to hold. And I'm pretty sure all the books are like, this might be the biggest book by like this much. They're all really big books. But you can read them in like 2 or 3 days because there's always something happening. There's no kind of downtime for you to think. There's action happening all of the time. But on the flip side of that, it doesn't feel like so much is happening that you can't take a breath. So it really like speeds up the reading process, but it doesn't hinder your enjoyment of the plot because it doesn't feel like they're rushing through and never giving you downtime. That's just the way this plot moves. There's also some great things that these authors do, specifically in this book. They did it obviously in the first one, but really with this one, they kind of like sprinkle in Easter eggs. So like the author J.M. Barrie, who actually wrote Peter Pan, shows up in this book randomly. The Darling family, or like the father of the Darling siblings that is in the actual like Peter Pan story, shows up in this book. It's just little things like that that make this experience so good. It's so well thought out, and they always bring it full circle. My husband just finished the 3rd one. He's read the entire series, but he reread the 3rd one for Believathon, and he said that there's a few things mentioned that they didn't even touch in the 2nd book, but are from the 1st book, and it's just, they like bring the entire series full circle, and I love it. It's just, there's always a connection. It always comes back to something that you already know about, and they don't leave any like loose ends. It was great. Yeah, 4 stars. Loved it. The next book was my first 5-star of the month, and it was fabulous. And that is The Magic Misfits by Neil Patrick Harris. This is the first in his Magic Misfits series. This was just fun. I did listen to the audiobook of this, which was narrated by Neil Patrick Harris himself. And you can just like hear him in this writing. Yes, I listened to the audiobook, but like the way that this was written felt like Neil Patrick Harris. And I don't even know how to explain this to you. It was very conversational. It was very funny at times. It was very sassy at times. The narrator kind of breaks the 3rd wall a lot of the time and talks directly to the reader. This is about a kid who discovers like magic, like magicians and magic for the first time. And he's run away from home because he doesn't have like a good family. Well, he doesn't really have a home. He runs away from his uncle, who was a really, really shady dude, and he doesn't want to steal, and all his uncle does is steal. And so he's like, no. And so he runs away from him and then meets all these new people in his life. And it was good. Also, there's a lot of rep in this book as well, obviously, seeing as it's from someone who's part of the LGBTQ community. But we've got mixed race people in here. We've got 2 dads in here. We've got a kid in a wheelchair in here. So like everybody is from a different background. So that was just very, I liked that a lot because it just gave it this extra layer of like reality on top of it. It also has these sections in the middle of reading that show you how to do specific magic that they literally just talked about. And it's a small book, but it flies by. It's got incredibly beautiful illustrations throughout this book that were just lovely to like look at. And this was just pure fun. This was just pure fun. If you want a book that's a great adventure and written so incredibly well, this is your book. And I cannot wait to get my hands on the rest of the series because now I'm obsessed. The next book that I read is actually one that I did not read for Believathon, and it's an adult book, and that is The Cul-De-Sac War by Melissa Ferguson. This is an e-arc that I received from NetGalley months ago, and it came out in November. So it's out now, and I did do a Goodreads review, which I will leave down below as always, but I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Now, let me preface this with saying this book is very important to me because of where it is set. So this book basically follows 2 main characters, 2 neighbors who get in a neighbor prank war, basically. It's a rom-com, it's fun, I loved it a lot. It is set around where I went to college, which is this little itty-bitty town in the middle of nowhere. No one knows about it except for like the people who live there and the people who have gone to this school. And it has a theater that's really important, and that's where our main character works. And it has all these like little things sprinkled throughout the book that are like actual places, actual restaurants in the town, actual like trails that you can go walk on. Everything about this book gave me like all of this nostalgic feeling about like my time in college. And that's why I loved it so much. It was a great romance story. I loved the banter between our main 2 characters. The pranks were ridiculous and I loved every second of it. But I think that's why I'm saying this, is because I think I rated it higher because of where it was set and how important that place is to me. It just felt like home. It felt like going home. That's what this book felt like. Like do you know what I mean? Like you just have a book that just means so much to you. So like you're obsessed with it. That's what it felt like, except for I'd never read anything by this author. I'd never read this book before. This was totally new to me, but because it was set in a place that I loved so much. Yeah, I think my school was even mentioned randomly in this, which just everything about this book made me happy. So it was great. They even at one point mentioned the Fox Theater in Atlanta, which is where I used to live. This book was made for me. That is what I have to, like, that's what I've determined about it. What about like the actual book? It, like I said, is a fun rom-com. There's a lot of banter between our main 2 characters. They are so much fun. It is very, very funny. It does tackle some harder things. So like some of the characters are dealing with some harder situations than I'm used to in kind of like fluffy romance books. But it was still great. There were still a lot of learning moments. The ending did surprise me a little bit. Not by like the ending, not the romance story ending, but like ending of like what happened to some of these characters. It surprised me because it wasn't what I was expecting. It was good. The next book that I read, we're back on the middle grade for Believathon, is Torn by Margaret Patterson Haddocks. This is the 4th in the Missing series. I hate when I read these books just because I can't review them for you. So this is a sci-fi-ish story that gets ridiculous, basically. It's the 4th in the series, and like every single time I read one of these books, I literally can't tell you anything about it because of a huge cliffhanger at the end, or like a big spoiler at the end of the first book. But this is connected to the 3rd one more than any of the past books have been connected to each other. It's stressful as all get out because there is a time travel element to this series, and time travel stresses me out regardless of like what's happening in it. When time travel is involved, I'm stressed. And this did not help because you put kids in the situation and it just gets crazy. And it was good. I was a ball of stress the entire time reading it, but it was good. One thing that I didn't love about this book, did I even tell you what I rated it? I rated it 4 stars. Wow, I'm good at this. The one thing that I didn't love about this book is the ending, because I have no idea what happened. I read it, and I have no idea what like I witnessed and what I read, because I was so confused. And then they moved on and wrapped everything up, and I was like, excuse me, how did we get here? And I'm still not sure. So the ending was not my favorite, and I'm sure it's going to come back in one of the later books, and I'm going to have no idea what's happening. But this is just a very creative story. I really like the thing that I can't tell you about that this author has chosen to expand on throughout each of these books. I'm excited for the 5th one, which I am reading in December because it's my husband's favorite in the series and I want to know why it's his favorite. So I'm excited about that. But yeah, I feel so bad. I can't really tell you anything, but it was stressful and I loved every second of it. It's like one of those series that is just action-packed, and by the time you're done, you're like, breathe out, and you're like, oh, I was holding my breath the entire time because I was so stressed. That's what the series, that's what the series does. The next book that I ended up reading was, wait, I actually have a copy of it. Kelsey, I kept this book from the library for this exact purpose. Good job. Okay, the next book that I ended up reading in November was One True King by Soman Janani. This is the 6th book in the School for Good and Evil series. I apologize for the shine. It's a library book. What you gotta do? This book ended up giving 4.5 stars for me. It was so much fun, and I absolutely adored my time reading this. But I think in the grand scheme of the series, I enjoyed 4 and 5 better. This did solidify that the second half of the series is my favorite. I prefer the second half over the first half. But it was so good. We learned a lot of things about our villain because we're wrapping up the villain that we've seen for the last couple of books. And we're learning all of the things. And then, like, you think you know something and it changes. And then you're like, oh, so it's this thing now. And then it changes again. It is mind-bending. But it was a lot of fun. This felt like a really good end to a series. It felt like this is how the story should go. This felt like the finale that I needed and wanted, is basically what I'm trying to say. The only thing that I didn't love about this book was the ending, in the sense of how quickly it ended. It felt like there was a chapter missing at the end that actually did wrap up all of the loose ends. It just ended, and it was a very abrupt ending, and like that's kind of what he's done in the past, but he likes to throw a kind of plot twist in the very last chapter of all of his books and then end the book, and you're like sitting there stressed. And I wasn't sure how he was going to end the series since there was no more books after this, and it felt very similar to the past books, except for that there was nowhere to go, so it just ended. So not my favorite ending, but overall, freaking loved this story. Made me incredibly happy. And I'm so glad that I'm sad to see the series go, but I'm happy that I've reached here, and like I know the things, and I love these characters, and I can't wait till this book comes out in paperback and I can get my own copy of it. But this was great. I gave it 4.5 stars. The next book that I ended up reading is actually a graphic novel, and that is Sheets by Brenna Thumler. This is a graphic novel about a laundromat that has ghosts, is kind of the best way that I can describe it. That's kind of what I knew going into it, and it deals with a lot of things, so like trigger warnings for grief and loss of a parent for this book, because those are very prevalent in this book, but this was very well done. It was very fast-paced. It delved deeper into some things that I expected it to. I wasn't really sure, because so graphic novels are very, very quick reads, so I always feel a little iffy with them anyway because the story is so quickly over. With middle grade, it's even worse for me because it is geared towards younger audiences, so the wrap up and like the message of the story is a lot cheesier than like normal graphic novels because they're geared towards younger kids. And I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about this, but I ended up loving it, and I ended up being fascinated by the story. I think my favorite part about this story was the kind of world this author has created around the ghosts, and all the ghosts wear sheets, and there's a reason for that, and she dives into this world of why that's a thing. And I was worried that she was just gonna like make all the ghosts have sheets and never address it, because like that's something that you could do for a younger reader and they probably wouldn't question it, and she did not do that, and it made me so happy. So this world that she's created is fascinating, and I loved it. The next book that I ended up reading was George by Alex Gino. I gave this 5 stars. Pretty sure this is my favorite book of the month. It was amazing. It was just utterly amazing. So this follows a girl named George who is in 4th grade, and she knows that she is a girl. She has like accepted this about herself, but when everyone looks at her, they see a boy, and so she's not told anybody that she's actually a girl. And so it follows her experience in 4th grade, but also at the same time, their school is putting on a play version of Charlotte's Web, and George really, really, really wants to be Charlotte. And because everyone sees George as a boy, she's not allowed to be Charlotte. And it's this very beautiful story that I think should be required reading for middle grade. I think it's a stunning story. I think it gives you a whole new idea and a whole new understanding for younger readers of people who are transgender and people who are growing up and feel like were born in the wrong body may think that they are weird. But if they have books like this and they see that they are not alone, it should just be in schools and people should read it. I also appreciated that everything about this book felt realistic. The way George talked, the way George thought, the things that happened to George, the things that George focused on that were important to her. It felt right. It felt like a kid writing the story, and I thought it was great. And the home life was very fascinating to me because, like, once there's like a moment where like part of George's family is supportive and the other part is not as supportive, and it's not the part that you expect. And I loved that twist. This was great. Please read it. I read this in one sitting. In like an hour, I think. It was really, really quick. The time on this video is actually not that bad. Excuse you. That is no longer warm. The next book I read is actually the sequel to Sheets, and that is Delicates. This book does not come out until March, so once I finished Sheets, I went immediately onto NetGalley and found an ARC copy of Delicates and requested it, and they were so incredibly kind and gave it like instantly to me. So okay, so this book got 5 stars. Let's just start there. This book, out of Sheets and Delicates, I loved Delicates more. Delicates felt like George did, and the fact that it covered some very deep, dark topics for a middle grade book, graphic novel, whatever. But I consider this a required reading for middle grade. Now, this book takes place after the events of Sheets. It follows our main character from Sheets as she's kind of like accepted by the popular crowd and trying to like fit in with them, and in doing so, watching a kid at their school get bullied by her friends, and also like forgetting her friends at the laundromat. What this book does well, in my opinion, is it tackles the topics of bullying and thoughts of suicide, and it does it in a middle grade setting, and it does it in a way that is understandable. It doesn't dive very, very deep into those topics, but it does talk about them. So obviously trigger warnings for those two. And like the thing about this book is with bullying, it doesn't tackle like bullying is bad. Obviously we all know that bullying is bad. It tackles it in the fact that you didn't do anything when you saw me being bullied, and therefore you are now taking part in that action. You are a bystander of it, and that means that you were bullying as well. And so it kind of tackles that topic as well, which I found fascinating, and especially for a book that is geared towards younger readers. I can't even tell you how amazing this book was, because all of a sudden it started talking about these things that I never expected it to. I had no idea what I was getting into with the sequel, because it didn't sound like anything about the first one, and like the ghost aspect of it is not as prevalent in the second one as it is in the first one. But it was very good, and I think it should be required reading because it's in a very important story that I think everyone should read about, especially younger readers. This was good for all ages, but specifically younger readers. The next book that I finished was The House with the Chicken Legs by Sophie Anderson. I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars, mainly because while I was reading, I was having fun. I was enjoying the time that I had spent in this book, the time I had invested with these characters. When I put it down, I had absolutely no desire to pick it back up, and that really hindered my enjoyment. And the story is fascinating. I absolutely loved the creativity of the story. I still cannot tell you what happened. I am not sure what the main plot point of this book is. I have no idea. The back basically says that it follows this girl named Marinka, whose grandmother is Baba Yaga, who is the person who helps the dead travel from this world to the next, and they live in this house with chicken legs that moves around all the time, and Marinka really, really wants to have friends and live in one solid place, and the house doesn't let her. And so it's very much a character-driven story rather than a plot-driven story, which might have been why I was really confused about what the plot was, because, like, there is one, and there's always something happening, but there also isn't one at the same time. It was good. I enjoyed this book a lot. It just wasn't amazing, which is why I got 3.5 stars, because it was good. It just, I don't think this one was for me specifically. So I'm excited to see what other things this author comes out with, because a lot of the plot points throughout this book were fascinating to me. And like I said, I loved it when I was reading it. I thought it was going to be a 5-star for me. And it just wasn't, because I didn't want to pick it up. It just felt like a burden to read. So that was a little sad, but it was very interesting. I really got connected to our characters. I love the house. The house is adorable. And it was good, it just wasn't great. The next book that I ended up reading was The Penultimate Peril by Lemony Snicket, which is the 12th in the series of unfortunate events that I have been rereading all year with Serena from Her Wandering Mind. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Like every other book in this series, this was good. I enjoyed my time reading it. I am so excited and stressed that there's only one book left, because, like, where are these kids what's going to happen? I don't know. I do not know. What I loved about this book is this takes place in a hotel, and throughout this hotel, they have sprinkled, like, people that the kids have met throughout this entire series. So a lot of their guardians are at this hotel. You're seeing people that you may not have seen since the 4th book or the 2nd book, or, like, you know, not the 2nd book, but, like, you know what I mean. It is like these people are sprinkled throughout this hotel, and it's very fascinating to me. I also like how this hotel is structured. So it is based off of the Dewey Decimal System. So based on who is physically there, whatever job you are, or kind of like why you're there at the hotel, or whatever room you're looking for, it's in a specific place because of the Dewey Decimal System, which feels right for this series and also fascinates me and confuses me all at the same time. The ending did feel like it was setting up very nicely for the last book, so I am interested to see what's going to happen. So, real glad that I read this. I love the audiobooks by Jim Carrey, so, like, Jim Curry, totally different person. I love my time reading this. I'm very excited to see where this series goes in the very, very last book. It was great. It felt funnier in this one than the past books, but I loved it, and very happy I read that. The next book that I ended up picking up was The Mystic School of Music Craft by Jessica Corey. This was a very fun middle grade about a magic school, but the magic system involves music. So when a musician is playing music, that is basically their version of a spell, and each thing, like each specific piece of music, does something specific. And it follows our main character, who really, really wants to go to this school, and she plays flute because her mother plays flute, and her mother went to this school, and her audition goes horribly wrong, and then she gets accepted anyway, and finds out that it was an accidental acceptance, and she has to kind of prove her place. The magic system in this world was fascinating to me, because basically, like, if you take a book of music, that is a spell book to them. If you play specific songs, it can do specific things to the world. I listened to this on audiobook via Audible, and their version, I'm not sure if all versions do this, but their version had actual music underneath. So anytime there was a spell being played by any of the kids at the school, any of the teachers at the school, like anytime there was a spell being played, there was music underneath. I also paid attention to what instruments people were playing. So like I said, our main character played flute. She had a very good friend who played violin, and so, like, if it was the two of them playing together, you would only hear a flute or a violin. And it was so well put together, and the fact that, which I learned afterwards, the orchestra that actually did the music was a youth orchestra. It was so well done, and I really liked this. It felt like it was a good setup to the rest of the series, except for that there is no rest of the series. This is a standalone as of right now. This felt like a good beginning point, where, like, there could be more, but at this point there isn't. And it felt like your first year kind of normal magic school type of things. And yeah, it was very well done. I really appreciated it. I wasn't sure what I was going to think about it because halfway through I was kind of like iffy about it, but the closer we got to the end, the more I liked it, and it was really cool. The magic system was fascinating. That's my favorite part about this entire book. The next book I read was another 5-star, and that is A Pinch of Magic by Michelle Harrison. I understand why everyone hypes this book up now. I loved this book. I loved the plot. I was so invested in these characters. I was so enthralled by what was happening to them and fascinated by the story. And I loved every second of it. It follows these 3 siblings that are part of a family who has been cursed to never leave the place that they currently live. If they leave, they're going to die the next day. And they're also given these magical objects to have. Each sister has a specific object, and this is an adventure as they try to find out more about said curse. This was so well done. I want to read everything by this author now. I do have the sequel, which I'm so excited about, so I can continue with that. But I'm not even sure where it's going to lead, because like this felt like a good standalone. So like I have no idea, based on what happens at the end, how we can continue forward. But I'm excited to see where we're gonna go. There is also kind of a like dual timeline, a little bit that's happening throughout this, because you learn about these kids and then you're also kind of watching them as they figure out about kind of like this mythology, folklore that surrounds this witch from their kind of like past in this town. And so there, like I said, there's a little bit of a dual timeline with that. I really loved it. This was so good, and I want to read everything by this author now. So, her story crafting is fabulous. The next book that I ended up picking up was my nonfiction, which I didn't want to read anything else when I was reading, and that is The Private Life of Victoria by Alexander MacDonald. This was not the one that I said I was going to read in my TBR, because I changed my mind halfway through the month. This is basically exactly what it sounds like. It's a biography that just kind of like skims the surface of Queen Victoria, but the author has access to the Queen's private diary that she kept. I'm trying to remember when she started it. For 4 years. She only didn't write in it for like right after she gave birth to her kids, or right after her husband died, I think. And then like later on when she had like a week left to live, she stopped writing in it then. But she wrote in it her entire life. And so the author takes bits and pieces from her diary and kind of talks about the Queen's life. And this was fascinating to me because I recently watched the BBC adaptation Victoria of actually Daisy Goodwin's Victoria. So it's based on that book, which is based on actual Victoria. So I only knew the TV show. I will read that book at some point, but I've only known the TV show. And they are so historically accurate, because everything that happened in this book, I was sitting there going, oh, I remember that from the TV show. And then they would describe it exactly how they did it in the TV show, which I guess the reverse is the TV show did it exactly as history was, but I didn't know how historically accurate it was until I read this like mini biography on her. This was fascinating. I did not want to read anything else but this book when I was reading it. It was so great. I have discovered that Victoria is a monarch in history that fascinates me, and I just want to read all the things about her now. So this was a great start. It doesn't dive very deeply into her life. It just kind of like skims the surface of all the important things. So if you want like a deep dive into her life, this is not the book. But if you want a better than Wikipedia understanding of her life, highly, highly recommend. And the very last book of Believathon, not the last book of the month, just the last book of Believathon, is The Vanishing Trick by Jenny Spangler. I gave this one 4.5 stars. This was fun. It flew by so quickly. I mean, yes, I listened to the audiobook, and this is not like a very large book, but it's a very fascinating mystery that dives into a part of magic that I've never seen before. It follows this guy named Leander whose mother has died, and so he's kind of like squatting in the house where she used to work because he has nowhere else to go. And one day he meets this woman named Madame Pinchbeck, and she basically offers him a job and a place to live if he'll like do stuff for her. And he's like, sure. She goes, great, just like give me, you know, the locket you're wearing that happens to belong to your dead mother. And he's like, okay. I mean, like, it's a much bigger struggle than that, but like he does give it over to her. And now she has trapped his soul in this object, and he is one of 3 kids that she has basically doing her bidding. And she's like a charlatan in a sense, where like she says that she's a medium and can talk to the dead and has seances, but they're all kind of like tricks. But she does actually have physical magic because she's been able to trap these kids in objects. And like she calls them cabinets, and she can make them come and go inside their cabinets at will, and each cabinet is important to that kid for a specific reason. And it was just very fascinating. This magic system fascinated me. I would love to see a YA version of this world because I wanted to know more about how she had these powers. But I just wanted to know more about this woman, and like, she is evil. She comes off as this super like meh villain at the beginning, but by the end you see how manipulative she is and how actually evil she is and how she doesn't care about anybody. She was a very good villain is what I'm trying to say. She was a very good villain, and I loved this so much. It was so good. I loved seeing the relationship between all of these kids because it grew a lot throughout this book. Yeah, it was good. Highly recommend that one as well if you want like a good cozy fall read. That's what this feels like, is like a good cozy fall read. And the very last book that I read in the month of November, I had one day left and I really just wanted to read one more thing. So I picked up the graphic novel version of Pride and Prejudice that is put on by Marvel Comics. Now, I gave this 3 stars because it wasn't terrible, but it also wasn't great. So as far as the plot goes, it was pretty accurate to the original, obviously sped up because it's a graphic novel. And I didn't have any problem with the story. I thought the story was very well done. I thought it was pretty accurate to the story, like the original story by Jane Austen. My problem with it was a very, very personal one, and that was the art style. I thought the art style was very, like, fine. It was an art style that worked. I think it did not work for this story. I think the Marvel Comics should not have done this version because the people in it, first off, I couldn't tell the difference between any of the Bennett sisters. They all looked the exact same because the author really liked, or the artist really liked to use shading, and the only people who had different hair color were Kitty, who had red hair, and Jane, who had blonde hair. But Jane's hair in the dark, they would color it brown or black, and then she would look exactly like Lizzie. And so you're like, who are these people? I couldn't tell any of them apart. The art style wasn't my favorite. It wasn't terrible. I think it works very well for like superhero Marvel comics, like what Marvel's known for. It just did not work for this book. It was too hard. It was too, like, the edges were too rough. It needed to be softer for a classic like this. It didn't work. It did not work, in my opinion, for the story that they were trying to tell. I had no problem with like the art, as in like the specific panes they chose, like what they chose to showcase in each pane. And like I said, the plot was fine. I just think they should have gone with a different artist because I don't think this worked for this story. Again, totally personal. You may think completely differently than me, but that's really why I didn't like it as much as I wanted to. It was just okay. It wasn't terrible and it wasn't great. It was smack dab right in the middle. So, as my light disappears, I'm going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed this very long wrap up because that's who I am now as a person. I remember when reading 12 books in a month was like a goal of mine. Like, I never thought that I'd ever reach 12 books in a month. And now it's like a normal thing for me to do. I don't know who I am anymore. But I hope you enjoyed nonetheless. Please let me know if you've read any of the books that I mentioned. And please let me know if you participated in Believathon. Let's chat down below about your experience. Or if there was a book in November that you just absolutely loved. I want to know these things. Let's talk about it. Why am I doing this? I have no idea. But I hope that you enjoyed, and if you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you want to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there if you want to follow along on any of those. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.